Awesome. All right. Well, we got a couple people here. I'm sure some more are going to start trickling in, but I'm going to pass it off to our official host, Dan, here to kick things off.
Well, thank you, Wayne. Well, hello and welcome to A Love Letter to Lagers. My name is Dan Baker. I am one of the three beer busters. We are a craft beer podcast based mostly out of central and eastern Pennsylvania. Two of us are in Philly. One of us is in the Reading area. I am joined here by my brother and co-host, Wayne Baker. And we are joined virtually by our cousin and co-host, Steph Hefner.
Hello.
Now, there's one thing that you need to know about us. And I usually try not to speak about or on behalf of other people, but I feel like it's justified. We love lagers, obviously. Yes. And we want to share that love with as many people as we possibly can. Is we need to celebrate the crisp, the cool, the often underappreciated and overlooked unsung hero of craft beer. And anybody who's had a beer with us, listened to the podcast, seen what we're drinking on Instagram, Untapped, you name it, you know that we love lagers. It's really not a secret. And because we want to celebrate it, and it is Philly Beer Week, and we want you to have the best information with some of the best people you can hear from in the business, we have two esteemed guests who are joining us for this, and we're just going to dive straight in and introduce them. We have, joining us from Bierstadt Lagerhaus in Denver, Colorado, we have Ashleigh Carter. Ashleigh, thank you for joining us.
Howdy, y'all. Thank you guys for having me. It's been a while since we've chatted, but I'm looking forward to it.
Well, and of course,
I'm looking forward to talking to Jack, because I have never actually met you in person. So,
yeah. Well, joining us from Jack's Abbey in Framingham, Massachusetts, we have Jack Hendler. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and it's no secret that, your breweries are both based around lagers. So we could not think of two more influential people in the business to have on to enjoy a couple crisp, cool ones with us and talk about the beer at hand. And I think a good place to start, and I'll pose this to both of you, and I guess maybe Ashleigh will hear from you first, and then Jack. Why lagers, and why have you organized your businesses around lagers? So I guess Ashleigh.
Lagers, kind of on like a 150-year winning streak. So it's a kind of a misnomer. I mean, I guess in the craft world, it seems like people don't drink them or whatever. It's new, but it's definitely, the kind of beer you can drink a lot of, obviously. For me, I've always loved how technique driven it is, not necessarily straight up, recipe driven or whatever. A lot of the culture too around just drinking lager beer, because of, how generally speaking low alcohol it is. And, basically, if you've ever been to a German beer garden, just the idea that lager is just so nuanced, and it's not really, doesn't hit you in the face in any specific way. And it's kind of something that you don't have to focus on when you're talking to, when you're talking with a group of people. It's kind of like something in the background that kind of helps, feed the conversation. And so, when we were thinking about what we were going to make, there actually was no other thing. There wasn't actually, it was just like, yeah, of course, I want to make my favorite kinds of beer so that I have access to, fresh examples of my favorite beer all the time. And so that's really the impetus of making lager beer for us.
Awesome. Yeah, Jack. So what about Jack's Abbey? Why is that your mission is lagers?
Well, I guess I would echo a lot of the same points there. Specifically why we started a brewery that focused on lager beer, though, has a lot to do as well with just the industry in general. It's amazing how few breweries, there's 10,000 breweries. I don't know if there's 100 that focus on just brewing lager beer. We're starting to have that conversation. It's becoming a little more popular. But it's really interesting to me how few breweries still, from the craft perspective, are focusing on different styles of lagers. And, it's just something that I wanted to bring back into the craft world. I think there's this misconception that lager beer is, this light, cheap, fizzy, yellow thing. But, I think that people are starting to understand that there's a much bigger category of beer to be had when we talk about lager.
Yeah, and that's a good way to phrase it. Now, Jack's Abbey's been around for, about 10 years now? This is your 10th anniversary, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, congrats on making it to that milestone first, especially in business in arguably an IPA-dominated world. But I like that you mentioned that there was the people thought of it as the flavorless, fizzy yellow water that wasn't really that good and didn't really have much to offer. We started our podcast 8 years ago in 2013, and that was kind of the mind frame I got from people around them too, even going years and years after that. But you know, they've stood the test of time. And actually, like you said, they have a 150-year winning streak, give or take. And the added benefit for those of us here in Philly and for Philly Beer Week is the lager is allegedly a Philly import into the country from Germany.
Yes, the first lager ever brewed. And then when I was looking this up, the first lager ever brewed in the U.S. was in Philadelphia. It was a guy named John Wagner.
Yep.
There's a historical marker in the city commemorating it. Now, there are some historians who dispute this claim, but I say Philly can lay claim to the first lager. I would like to, though, before we talk a little bit more specifically about Bierstadt and Jack's Abbey and your experience in making lagers, I know a lot of people watching right now and listening and watching this later on probably know, but for those who don't, what is lager? What does it mean to be a lager? Can, maybe just a brief rundown. Now, I know like almost every beer is either an ale or a lager and has to do with fermentation temperatures, top fermenting, bottom fermenting. But I would like to pose this question to our two experts, and we'll let Jack chime in first on this one. How would you describe lager to someone who doesn't know what that means as far as a beer style?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hoping I get the second shot at this. But,
I'm so glad they picked you first. I was like, oh shit, not me.
That's a good question. To me, it's so much more than what the general public, and going back to the light fizzy yellow stuff, but even within craft, I think there's a misunderstanding of what lager is. And lagers, by definition, it's using lager yeast, but for us at the brewery, it's also about tradition. It's about taking these brewing techniques that are basically unused. No one does this stuff anymore because you don't have to. And we do it because we want to. And we think we make a better quality beer. Things like decoction, things like natural carbonation, things like where you're getting your hops, where you're getting your malts, and then a lot of other nuances within just the fermentation. And there's a lot of other just older techniques that fall within lager beer that we're trying to bring out. We're not just trying to make, crisp, flavorless beer. There's a bigger mission that we're trying to achieve when we brew lager.
Yeah. I personally like to think of lager as the absence of yeast character. And that's how I kind of describe lager in general. And I think it kind of like separates, like there are four like big things to me that separate ale and lager. If you take two beers, a blonde ale and a Helles, for example, like on paper, they look very similar to one another. Same with like per se a Dunkel and like a brown ale, right? But there's like to me about like four-ish things that, really separate the two from one another. From a flavor perspective. And that one of them is yeast characteristic, or the lack thereof. The second is, ester profile or the lack thereof. The crispness and drinkability of it. Definitely, to me, those could be two separate things or, the same thing, but crispness, of a Helles lager versus a blonde ale. And then the drinkability, just the lack of, it's not really fatiguing on the palate. Even as you get into some of the bigger styles like Doppelbock, really if you look at it historically, or you look at it the way that the Germans, if you're talking specifically German lager, any really lager place that's making lager, European style, is that you can have a lot of them. Even when it comes to Doppelbock, you should be able to have, 2.5 liters of it and not be tired of the flavor, and we have this kind of idea in the United States of kind of making everything bigger and hoppier. But if you look at their like actual historical and, where they come from, a lot of them are very lower in flavor profile, and they can be, you can drink more than one of them. And that to me really kind of separates ale and lager, is how it fatigues or doesn't fatigue your palate rather.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that we're definitely going to touch on is how lagers do seem to be becoming more popular in the craft beer world. And I think part of the reason that they haven't been, that has to do with the differentiation between lagers and ales. The reason lagers haven't traditionally been super popular in craft beer is because they just take longer to make. You know, the lagering process is much.
If you do it right, yes.
If you do it right. Exactly. Where conditioning an ale, you can turn around a beer fairly quickly, whereas a lager is going to have to sit in tanks for weeks. And, you know, most craft breweries are small businesses that have to be very, you know, have a lot of output. They can't, you know, have beer sitting in tanks for forever. Oh, hi.
Sorry, it's dog.
Sorry. That's all allowed. But yeah, so I think that is part of the reason why, you know, as craft beer exploded, it was all ales for the longest time, and doing lagers was sort of different.
Well, and I think that it was ales or IPAs or whatever you want to say was the most popular style back at the first craft beer boom. Is it was something different than what everyone else was drinking. Macro beers were the beers that our dads or grandfathers were drinking, and they had this stigma of not being cool. And it was cheap beer, and it was not good beer, even though, I mean, they are really well-made lagers, but they were sort of shit on. So, you know, enter craft beer, and we have something that's completely different, and it's flavorful, and it's a different color, and, you know, all of these things that, you know, this aroma, all of these things that capture our attention and our senses. I think that was very attractive, and it was something different and exciting. So I think that had a lot to do with it too.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious, what I really want to know is, you know, we have two pioneers in the lager world here, but from two different ends of the country, you know, Massachusetts and Colorado, but also sort of starting at different parts on the craft beer timeline. Now, you know, Jack's Abbey, 10 years old, you know, Bierstadt is 5 years old, and 5 years doesn't seem like a large amount of time, but I feel like in the timeline of craft beer, it is a significant amount of time. So, and I showed Ashleigh when she jumped on, but Jack, I did want to show you my vintage cooler that I still proudly take with me everywhere. And I vividly remember my very first trip to Jack's Abbey and how you guys have grown over the last 10 years. But sort of take us back and talk about what was it like 10 years ago when you guys started, and was there a resistance, and did you have to encourage people to say, hey, come, lagers are cool, drink our beers? How did you get a following, and how has that perhaps changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly a lot's changed as far, you know, it's tough to tell if it's just our local area, but certainly when we opened and people come into the brewery, when people were, you know, just doing brewery tours, they come in and be like, what do you have? And they look at the list of beers, and it's just a bunch of lagers. They're like, is this all you have? And, you know, we don't get that anymore, but I think people know who we are now. We actually changed our name. We used to be Jack's Abbey Brewing, and now we're Jack's Abbey Craft Lagers, just so no one was confused when they came into the building, what we were trying to do. And, but on the flip side, we really did understand that there was a lot of confusion, and we definitely started brewing some styles of beer that are not traditional, things that really were geared more towards people who are familiar with craft beer. Like we brew a number of very hoppy lagers, American hop lagers. And in the earlier days, we did much better selling non-traditional beers. And as we've grown, we've definitely shifted towards more traditional beers. So maybe 40% of our beer is a Helles that we call house lager. And that's a beer that we have a minimum 5-week turn on that, and that's for the summer, but usually sits for 8+ weeks, 9 months out of the year. And our second best-selling beer is a Pilsner, a little bit, not necessarily the most traditional Pilsner, uses a new German hop called Blanc in it, so it's a little bit more aromatic maybe than some other Pilsners. But we really sort of made a strategic decision when we built our newer brewery back in 2015 that we really wanted to double down on more traditional styles of beer and sort of shift away from some of the more Americanized, hoppier or sort of odd styles of beer that we were doing that were helpful to be that gateway for us to get people interested in lager beer, but weren't necessarily part of the longer plan for what we wanted to achieve at the brewery.
I remember the first time I had Framingham, and now this shows you how long ago this was, because my knowledge of craft beer is clearly much more diverse, but I was like, wait, a Baltic Porter is a lager? Like, I feel like the beginning steps of my education and appreciation for lagers and how diverse they are. And, a lager is not just one thing, which in, a lot of people's mind, it was back at the beginning, but a lager can be many things and many colors. So that was sort of a mind-blowing experience for me very early on as a craft beer drinker.
Absolutely.
Now, Ashleigh, you're coming from arguably one of the best beer cities in the world. Now, a lot of people, myself included, may argue that Philly is a pretty incredible beer city, but Denver is a place where craft beer appreciation is at a high, and there's a very diverse amount of breweries out there. Do you think that opening Bierstadt in Denver allowed you to sort of flourish more because people appreciate craft beer, or did you also find there was a struggle to get people to want to drink lagers?
So while I think craft beer in Colorado is, of course, a lot of people know about it and a lot of people drink it. I weirdly would say that just because we have maybe more does not make our drinkers as educated as they should be on beer in general. You know what I mean? I'm talking about just basic general styles. Like, you don't have to know what the most basic hop is, or nothing like that, but to know even just the 4 ingredients that go into it, or something like clean glassware or whatever. I actually think that because we have so much beer, that it's kind of been able to not have been as good in some ways, because there is so much of it. I would say opening in Denver, so I'm a native of Colorado, so my whole family lives here, so this is kind of always where I was going to open a brewery. That, or I went to college in Asheville, North Carolina. That would be the other place that I would open a brewery, because it's beautiful and warm. But the thing that I think, honestly, is the only thing that's really helped us, not the only thing, but as far as lager, is because we were in Denver and the Great American Beer Festival's here, and because there's so many industry people that are here. Without the industry people, we would probably, it would be really hard. It would have been really hard for us to become who we are right now. And I think, honestly, hosting the GABF every year is one of the biggest reasons why we've been able to be on everybody's radar as much as we are, because everybody finds their way to Denver for some reason or another, whether it's a CBC or a GABF or World Brewing Congress. Like, a lot of people just end up their way here, and we are so close to Denver because it's hard. It's hard to get people to understand, but mostly because it's kind of a beer, craft beer drinkers are promiscuous. It's really hard for them, to come to your place all the time and for the same things. And people think they want all this choice. And I think when it boils down to it, we were stuck really hard to our guns about never having more than 5 beers on tap. And really 3 beers all year round, Pils, Dunkel, Helles, and that is it. People think they want choice, and I'm of the opinion that they like also being told no a lot. So, and being in a place where there are 15 breweries, within a mile of my doorstep, that can be considered a good thing or a bad thing. I think of it as a good thing. I don't have to make IPA. I don't have to do these other things. Also, we own a restaurant, so I can put cider on tap. I can put somebody else's, seltzer on tap or whatever. Like, I don't have to make those decisions. I don't have to make something I don't want to make. So in that way, it's good to be in Denver. Also, it's hard to be in Denver because, again, people think they know a lot about beer, but I find their knowledge lacking severely.
Well, and we've been chatting for over 20 minutes now, and we've been drinking, but we haven't actually talked about a beer, but maybe this would be a good time to mention the beer that sort of introduced most people, I think, to Bierstadt, which is, of course, the slow pour Pils, which I think is what we're all drinking right now. So Ashleigh,
I have a Helles actually. I started Helles, but I have a pills in the cooler here. So.
My can of Helles is empty already. That may have been my pre-gaming beer. But why don't you talk about slow pour pills a little bit, the story behind it, and maybe a little bit about the crazy buzz that sort of exploded over this beer. Maybe it was industry people that did that. I don't know.
I think a little bit, of course, was a little bit industry people. To me, that beer, it's been a beer that my business partner / husband / other brewer Bill has been, making for. This is his 25th year in the industry, so probably the last 20 years, relatively unchanged. So taking that recipe as something that he made at a brew pub that was a single temperature infusion. And then kind of pushing that to a different brewery that we used to both work at and he owned, that we don't talk about very much here in Denver, that we forget that whole part that happened about 10 years ago, to what we do now. And kind of the reason why we do what we do with that beer is it is the way that I like to drink beer. It's the way that I want my beer served. And to call it slow pour pills was kind of funny. At the beginning, we kind of had this back and forth conversation about what did we want to do with this beer and were we going to have our bar staff serve it this certain way? If we were, and we were going to call it this, and it was going to have to be that way every time. And we kind of went back and forth, but it's really the way that beer is just served in Germany. If you get a pills in Italy, when I was there and had, tipo, like that is how it's served, is in a 3-step pour with foam over the rim. And to me, at the previous place where we worked, and we were making pills and I would want my beer poured for me that way. It just made the most sense to us is that I want the customer to experience it the same way that I have it. And that was really important to us to kind of give you the experience that we wanted to have when we drank beer. And so, a lot of people look at it as a gimmick and they can think that or not. It doesn't really matter to me. That's the way that I like to drink beer. That's the glassware that we had been looking for years. And, I think that beer is perfect and there's not a single thing I would change about it. Not even after, the last 10 years.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned about it should have the head and the foam on the top. And, we talked about education as a craft beer. I guess, us, we know a little bit. I mean, you guys obviously know the most about this stuff. To think that we know a little bit more than the average beer drinker. But one of my biggest things I look back on and just shake my head, I have that visceral memory of yourself asking something dumb or saying something dumb. Oh yeah. I've got
so many.
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest things though, is I went to a bar probably, 2013, 2014, and I ordered a beer. I don't even remember what it was or what style it was, but there was maybe a half an inch of head in a pint glass on it. And I looked at the bartender, I was like, what is this? They're like, it's your beer. I'm like, well, yeah, why is there all this head? Like, you're shortchanging me on this beer. I want the beer. And now I know a lot better that I should not have given that bartender shit because they were serving me a beer properly. And I think the education on that could go a long way. You drink it that way for a reason. It's consumed that way for a reason overseas. And it really does it justice for it. So thank you for continuing that here in the US and trying to get more people on board with that kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of people said we couldn't do it or couldn't keep it up, and we do it every time. If there's 20 people in line at GABF,
GABF is crazy. There's like 30 glasses lined up, and so it's like waiting. Everyone's give me a beer.
We poured like 1,500 of them in one day.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Poured slowly, just like that. And I couldn't be happier about it. And I had a guy come up to us, actually a fellow brewer person, and was like, yo, you're busy. You're going to have to speed that up. And I was like, nah, that's why they're here. Yep. And so no matter what, if you want something else, order a liter Helles, do it. There's ways around it. But that's the way I like that beer. That's the way we've always wanted to serve it. I think everything about that glass from top to bottom is all about the details and filling in all the stuff. And, the Pils Dection on the bottom of it, which when we first started, those Pils Dection, each one of those little coasters at the bottom of the glass, I had to get them specially printed. They cost me 30 cents a piece for the first 2 years that we were open, until I found a printer. Actually, the German American Chamber of Commerce helped us, but found a printer to print them in Germany, which now they're a quarter cent a piece. So much better. Those first 2 years, I was like saving them. I would not get my beer with one on it because they were so expensive. But it was all part of how it had to be from the very beginning, or else people look at it like it's a gimmick, or like, you don't believe in it. So no matter what the cost, it was going to be that way. I didn't care how long people had to wait. I didn't care if it made people mad. I didn't care if it made bartenders quit, because this is my life's work in a glass. And so drink it or don't.
I love if you do drink it properly.
Yes, exactly.
That's right.
I mean, June 12th, by the way, too bad you guys aren't in town, because we do one time a year that we do pills in a liter, and it's on our brew anniversary, which is not our anniversary. It's the first time we ever brewed. So you can get a liter of pills this Saturday. And I think every person in the whole entire industry in Colorado shows up, and we're going to sell like 20 bags of pills. It's about to be wild. So
that's amazing.
Softball. Oh, and we put the little doily around the liter handle. It's like super fun.
That's perfect.
Well, I know my glass is empty, and we have a couple Jack's Abbey beers that are on deck.
We're going to transition to the house lager. I did want to shout out an attendee in the chat who said they love Bierstadt. So you have good taste.
I appreciate that.
They also said is that way of pouring something special for lager. Now that applies specifically to Pilsners. Are there any other styles that do like a slow pour serving? Or is that
honestly, they're most concerned about like wasting beer. That's like the biggest reason most of those people, pour it slowly, is that they don't want to waste it. So it just gets topped up. And also they're highly carbonated beers. So, you can pour any beer like that. By the way, I've drank a lot of that house beer when I was in Boston.
Very nice. I'm lucky enough to have some friends in Denver, and we do a beer trade. So I have, it's easier for me to get beer because I just go in the cooler. But I've had the pleasure the last few times to get a bunch of slow pour and Helles back home. So they're already gone. I would have pulled one out, but I thought about it. But they didn't survive too long here at my house.
This is my favorite Jack's Abbey glass. It has the logo on one side, but it says drink lager in big capital letters on the other side. I love this glass. It's probably my most used pint glass in the house. So I love this, the Jack's Abbey House Lager, because it quickly, when Jack's Abbey started distributing in the Reading, Pennsylvania area, this quickly became the house lager at the local bar that I would go to all the time. So the night of my homebrew club meetings, it was a half price draft night. So I could just keep drinking this super cheap all night. So it kind of feels like a local beer to me, even though I'm down here 6 hours south of you. But tell us about House Lager.
House Lager. So this is a beer we started brewing basically when we built the new brewery. It was the first canned beer we did. And that was sort of our way of really doubling down on more traditional styles of beer. We don't call it... We're a little, what we put on the can, I think is a little bit confusing. We call it a land beer, I believe. But I had gone to a trip to Franconia and sort of noticed that a lot of breweries just had a beer called lager. And I thought it was really weird. It was like, all right, it's just beer, drink it. And everyone was a little bit different. And I was just sort of a little confused by what it was. And I started having this conversation about what does just lager mean to a Franconian brewer? And it sort of just translates into country style beer. And I'm sure it's changed a lot over the times, but over the years, they tend to be fairly golden in color, very Helles-ish. But I think the Franconians and the Bavarians don't really like each other. So the Franconians don't want to call it a Helles, so they call it a land beer. Which is funny because they're like 60 miles away from each other or something like that. So we thought like we could do something sort of play to that a little bit, where we're not giving a true Helles, but it is a golden lager that's going to use Franconian malts. It's going to have a lot of that traditional brewing practices. So we spawned all our beers, so everything's naturally carbonated. This is a beer we decoct, and we're pretty proud of doing that because we're going to brew like 20,000 barrels of house lager. About 2/3 of our production is decocted. So maybe 40,000 barrels of decocted beer this year. And importing all these hops and malt. So there's not a lot of people that would dedicate that time and effort, because I don't even know that necessarily most people can taste the difference between a beer that's decocted and not decocted, or naturally carbonated or forced carbonated. But it's just something we're very proud of doing. We want to really showcase all these cool techniques and really push forward the concept of, instead of brewing a lager just the same way you would brew an ale, but with lager yeast, really doubling down and making sure that what you're brewing isn't just a marketing gimmick to say lager. You're really trying to make a different style of beer.
Speaking of beers that are just called lager, for the longest time, Yuengling here in Pennsylvania was lager. I mean, that's what, before I got into craft, that's what I drank. And you just walk into a bar and say, I'd like a lager, and that's what you got. So it's kind of funny.
A little bit different. I'd love for that to happen in the Boston area.
Me too.
But it's a little bit different from the brewer. If the brewer is just like, this is a lager, you know. But yeah, where in Reading were you getting this beer, by the way? That you said you
Canal Street Pub in Reading.
Yeah, it's that's my mom's cousin was part of that restaurant group, so that's how we got that placement here. So sort of our family bar as well. So that's cool little connection there.
Yes, lucky for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. They do an annual event called Brewphoria, which we've been lucky enough to be part of a couple of years in a row. And I think that was the first time I may have ever actually had this beer. I know it's definitely Canal Street, and it would make sense for it to be one of those events. And it took me by surprise, by complete and utter surprise, because I was still in the mind frame of, yep, lager is Yuengling, and this had the word lager in the name and was vastly different. And you know, it definitely holds its own. It's a fantastic beer. I love this one so much.
Nice.
That is really interesting. People from our area, we definitely, because Yuengling lager, for anyone that's not from this area, is not like a clear light American lager. It's much darker and maltier, and so people that grew up in our area with Yuengling, I think our view of lager is probably a little bit different, and perhaps maybe because of the lager history, and perhaps Yuengling is a big part of that, our appreciation for lagers may be a little different than most other places.
I think Eastern PA has a pretty big craft lager tradition as well. You think back to like stouts. I know they're not open, and Victory, and even like even breweries that don't necessarily focus 100% on lagers. I think you saw a lot more lager brewing, even from other breweries that did a lot of ales. I think there's a lot of German influence in that area.
Yeah, that's the thing. We have a lot of German heritage in the greater central and eastern Pennsylvania area, and like Pennsylvania Dutch territory is all us. So yeah, this kind of stuff fits right into our bloodline. Yep.
First lager was in Philly and Pennsylvania.
Still going with it.
I'm saying, like, if you're not in Colorado, and if you're not in Massachusetts, Framingham, Massachusetts, you know, the best lager you're going to find, come to Pennsylvania, and there's.
Well, I mean, we mentioned, you know, Victory earlier. Victory was the first time I had ever had a truly slow poured pils, and it was mind blowing. And
Bill did insist that they slow pour our pills for us when we recorded at Victory.
It's so cool. And I had never seen it done in the glass before. And now I understand why you need it in that glass and why it needs to be done right.
Yep. And you can listen to that, dig up that episode. I don't know what episode number it was, but whatever episode we did at Victory, you can hear Dan have his first slow pour pills, which I think was the first time I had it too, actually.
Yeah, probably. Because Wayne and I are not as well traveled as Steph.
Well, so my first one was at Bierstadt, but what was interesting is when they sat it down in front of me, the bartender prompted and asked if I wanted to order my next one a while. And I was like, wait, you just put this in front of me. Like I had learned very quickly that that's the thing. Like when they set it down, you order the next one a while. So by the time you finish it, your next one is ready to go. So I quickly learned the way.
Or you do pro and you order, our sales guy calls it a snack pack, which means you get your Hellas first while you wait for your pills.
That's perfect.
Begging us to put it on the menu. I think we're finally going to go for it.
Great. One thing that I saw earlier, Jack, on the Jack's Abbey website, was that you go to Germany every year to make sure you get German ingredients from a family-owned Bavarian operation. Is that still the case?
Well, I missed out last year, and I'm not sure about this year. We'll see. But yeah, we buy the vast majority of our German hops from an independent farmer in the Hallertau region. And I'm not sure. Did you buy hops from Florian sites as well? Yeah, so
yeah, I've been there. Yeah,
a little niche with a lot of lager producers in the U.S. He's fairly smart and sort of saw that as like a great marketing opportunity for people who that matters to. And so I'll try to go every year. I've gone the last few years, other than last year. And he's the one thing that makes it, normally you wouldn't buy from one farmer the vast majority of your hops, but he irrigates his hops, which is very unusual for German growers. They don't make that investment. But it's sort of his insurance policy to make sure that he can match the contracts that he signs.
Yeah, I haven't. I went twice during hop harvest there, actually right before we opened. I think 2 years later. I sadly haven't bought hops there for a minute, but only because we're so small that it's been hard to like sign such a big contract to have for so long. I'd like to hopefully in the next couple of years be able to do that again. But Florian at Zeitz Farm and taking the tour there. Have you taken the tour and gotten like on the back of that truck driven down the sidelines?
The scariest thing is getting there and you think there's bears coming to attack you, and it's just their dog.
The dog, he's such awesome. Yeah, we my friend and I drank hop schnapps with them and all sorts of things. So yes, I've totally been there. They're amazing. Such a cool place.
So what makes the hops so much different or better if they're irrigated that way? I don't think I would know the difference.
The irrigation on its own isn't better, but they've been having a lot of, with climate change, getting proper rainfall has been very challenging. So depending on where you are, you may not have enough rain and your crop will fail. So if you're buying from one farmer specifically and his crop fails, then you have no hops. That's why most brewers will buy hops from a broker, because they're buying from 100 farms and they assume that a few of those farms actually won't produce any hops, but still in the end, they have the vast majority of their contracts. So you got to just be very confident that you'll be able to get the hops that you need if you're going to go to a single farmer for your hop needs.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, it was actually the middle fruit were harvested. Eric Toft, who is the brewer at Schönraum, which is my favorite glass here, and got it. But they were talking about how they harvested middle fruit at the end of July, 2 years ago, which is very, very early. So yeah, definitely having the ability to irrigate is a big deal to make sure you get, climate change is real. Just saying that.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to the education thing. I had no idea that would make a difference. And I never would have thought about, climate change impacting how the crops could grow or fail. And that's, I feel like the more that you can educate a consumer, especially in craft beer, the more well-rounded picture they're going to get of the whole thing. And it really just, it extends so far beyond what's in your glass. Obviously we love the lagers that we have here. They're amazing. They're delicious. But there's so much more that goes into it. Ashleigh, you said it's your life's work in a glass, which is a very powerful statement to make. And I love that so much. And then it extends to the farmers, where you get your hops from. It extends to where you get your yeast from. There's more involved than people may think. And I think that well-rounded picture, seeing the whole thing helps everybody appreciate it just a little more.
Yeah, and as long as we're on the subject of climate change, it's supposed to be about lagers, but I did want to mention something that we actually had in one of our games on the podcast recently. And I don't know if you guys heard of this. It was New Belgium released a version of their Fat Tire called Fat Tire Torched Earth.
That's right.
And it was deliberately made with ingredients that were meant to replicate what brewers might have to use in the future if climate change isn't addressed. So they use smoked malts to imitate the fires
burning.
Yeah, fires affecting water supplies. They used hardy grains like millet and buckwheat. They used shelf-stable hop extract, and they cut the hops with dandelions. So the beer was made to be disgusting, to highlight what you're saying is that like climate change affects everything, and it affects hops as well. So like, you know, it touches all aspects of our lives. But back to lagers.
After that,
I kind of want to try that beer though.
I really
yeah,
would like
you know,
to
just
try
to,
it.
just
Yeah.
to say, I mean, it's a salient point that they're trying to make with it too. Yeah.
I did want to come back to talking about how the popularity of lagers has changed. Now, from our perspective, it seems to be getting more and more popular. We often credit Steph with that for spreading the good word.
Truth.
And I kind of curious, wanted to get into like, what do we think the factors are that have made lagers become more popular in the craft beer world? One thing when I was just thinking about writing up notes for this was that, you know, IPAs dominated for so long and still pretty much do. And people who aren't into craft beer, when they think of lager, they think of like the old, like, you know, big macro beers or beer flavored beer. And I think a lot of craft beer has moved away from being flavored like beer with adjuncts and you know, being hopped to oblivion and adding all kinds of stuff. You have like pastry stouts, which they're fun to drink. You know, people throw fried chicken in beers. But do you think the popularity in lagers is a response to like that going too far and people being like, I just want beer? That's my question.
I have so much to say. I think, all right. So I think that the popularity in lagers is overall a good thing as far as like craft beer goes. I think that sucks sometimes too, because a lot of people want to rename their blonde ale or whatever they want to make Kvike lager, which just infuriates me to like no end. Especially when I take, you know, 8 to 10 weeks to make every beer that I make. Anyways, okay. So I think the response for this like craft lager thing a little bit is because beer is growing, right? Our little bubble, which is still fairly little, is getting a little bit bigger. And there's honestly, no offense to people who make, you know, sour beer or whatever, but there's only so many people that are going to drink so much of it. Like, that's why you can't sell all of it in one state. That's why you've got to kind of spread it out, because when somebody goes to the liquor store, they might buy, you know, 1 or 2 bottles, and then they're going to hang on to them for a little while. And in the meantime, in order to keep up this really amazing, cool thing that we have in most of the states, and ideally, hopefully every state soon, is this idea that you can drink beer on premise, right? Like, that's just not conducive to selling a lot of beer. Is having just, you know, sour beer or just things over 8% or just whatever. So it's this idea of filling in your own draft list with something that you can drink a couple of, because you're probably only going to drink, you know, one of any of those other styles. Whereas, you know, if you have lager or something pale, it is going to attract maybe a larger group, and also the people that are there drinking are going to drink more than just one beer while they're sitting there. And, you know, while we call ourselves pretty much nonprofit, we do need to make some money at the end of the day. So, you know, even the people who have a lot of success, you know, making sours and et cetera, you're seeing them come out with lager, because at the end of the day, you can only sell a couple, you know, sours or a couple high flavor profile beers. So that's my theory anyways.
I want to talk about this.
Tamave?
Because this is quickly becoming one of, I think, our favorite beer styles, because Human Robot here in Philly made Pola Tamave, which we learned what that was. We learned how to pronounce it, and we've been drinking a crap ton of it. I may have some being shipped to me currently. And when I opened the box and saw this in there, I was like, oh shit, Bierstadt is making one too. Talk about Tamave. Yes. Well, we'll talk about this beer and this beer style, because the first time I had this style, a Czech garnet lager, I guess is what we would call it, I felt like this style had been missing from my life all along, and now I don't ever want it to go away. Is it all right to use this glass, you think, for this one?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
You've done great. You probably should use a Hellas glass, actually, but that'll work.
Really? I'm using
Too
a
late.
Risky Rocks glass.
There are no rules. There are no rules. You can use a risky rocks glass or whatever. Tamave was a cool one. I'm a big believer in that collaboration should be really organic. And they should be something that you either want to learn about or learn with somebody. Honestly, to this date, in 5 years, I've probably only made collabs with maybe 10 breweries. I think that's right, because to me, it's important to be friends or to like have a budding friendship and to have having something cool that you want to learn, and it should really come together without much effort. So we happened to be in Prague with Jeff Bagby of Bagby Beer in Oceanside. We were at a beer festival in Milan. He was at a beer festival in Estonia, and we're really good friends with him. So we were like, hey, after this beer festival, you want to meet in Prague? So we all met in Prague. We went and had.
Wait, hold on. You just said the sentence, after this beer festival, you want to meet in Prague.
Yeah. After this beer festival, you want to go meet in Prague. Like, it made a lot of sense at the time. I guess after 2020, like, it seems like a pretty amazing thing to say. But we decided to meet in Prague. He had never been to Prague. I had never been to Prague. My husband and business partner had been to Prague one before. And we took our business partner who had never been out of the United States before on his first out of state or out of country trip. So we were, around about, drinking a lot of, like, honestly, most Czech beer is really shitty. The diacetyl is overwhelming. Anybody who says the Czech Republic is the best place to drink beer is a stone cold liar, or I can't trust their palate on anything. But a lot of the beer was really bad, but this was a shining example. And I've heard that sometimes the Ufleku beer is not great, but this time we had it, which is what this is based on, this brewery called Ufleku. And they only make this one beer, dark, 13. 13 just refers to the Plato, the starting gravity of it. And we were sitting there drinking beer, listening to an accordion, eating some bread dumplings and goulash, taking shots of Bekarovka. And it said, hey, this is what we should do. And we actually got the chance to meet the brewmaster, the former brewmaster of Ufleku, who'd been there for 40 years or whatever, actually at GABF right before we were about to make it. And kind of gave us some pointers, but we kind of have an idea of how we were going to make it anyways. And it was just a really fun beer to make. And we had made it after GABF of 2019. And then during the pandemic, I felt like it would be a really good time to make it again because we were starting to can. And that's kind of, how we decided to come up with that beer. Low alcohol, it's, 4.3%. We used Budweiser Budvar yeast, so we didn't use our house yeast. And a lot of dark malt. And honestly, it's like been one of my favorite beers to make. It's super fun.
Say 4.3%? Is that
something like that. It's like 4.3 or 4.5.
I mean,
under 5 for sure.
Yeah.
Off the body, I would have assumed it was a little bit higher than that. I would have thought like 5.5.
Czech beer is very satiating to me, and it is part of the yeast. It's part of the finishing gravities aren't necessarily as low. There's about 4% crystal malt in there, which is more crystal malt than I think I've used in my whole brewery in the entire year, because it's appropriate for that style. And like I said, I think that yeast and I think Czech beer in general is just a little bit more like satiating, not necessarily sweet or cloying. There are some examples of Czech dark lager that are sweet and cloying. But to me, the best examples are just that kiss of roast, just that dryness. There's a perceptive hop character in there, but not overwhelming in any way. It's all about the kind of nuance and balance.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love that it's 4.3% because it's like a mind trick on myself. I feel like it's heavier, but it's not. And I could have multiples if I chose to responsibly.
Yeah, it's like the opposite. Usually it's a beer that's high in alcohol and you're like, it doesn't taste like it's that high in alcohol. And this is pleasantly the opposite way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
So I do want to mention, we had a question pop up that is for Jack. Someone wants to know, why is Smoke and Dagger tough to find in Eastern Connecticut lately? Is it still year round?
It's probably tough to find anywhere. Yeah, so that's a beer that we brewed since the beginning, and it was a much bigger part of our portfolio. But as we really focus on some of our better selling beers, some of the trailing end products are very challenging to maintain. So it's a beer that we'll still brew, and we always sell it at the brewery. But it's going to be challenging, particularly out of state, to have so many different options. So. Yeah, it's just like dark beer in the middle of the summer is just a hard sell, even if it's one of your best products. So
apparently,
yeah.
unless you're in Florida, apparently they sell 2 shitloads of dark beer in the summertime.
Interesting. Yeah. That's always the joke about like Southern California. It's just like all 10% beer. And in Massachusetts, you can only sell that in the winter. No one wants that in the summer. You can finally enjoy your outdoor experience. The last thing you need is a 10% beer. But I guess if you don't have any seasons, you can sell things whenever you want.
Well, and also I think if you live in Florida, you probably just want to drink a lot.
Yeah, 10% like adjunct stouts they drink them like mad in Florida. Mostly all year round.
All of our listeners in the Czech Republic are gone.
I do my best to offend pretty much anybody I can. Sorry.
Ooh, what can you say about Pennsylvania?
And also the people who think they know more about beer than they do in Colorado. They're all gone.
Exactly. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's your backyard.
So I think we should crack open another Jack's Abbey beer.
Yeah.
This is the post-shift Pilsner. So Jack, you want to talk a little bit about this beer?
Sure. So this is a beer we released maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. Something that we were really nervous about was putting out 2 golden lagers year round. We're like, no one's going to be able to figure this out, what we're trying to do here. So we made a really strategic decision to try to make our Helles and our Pilsner like as different as they possibly could be, but still falls within the laugh test of traditional style. So the Helles is sweeter, it's fuller bodied, it's 5.2%. It's a little on the high side for Helles, and that's why we call it a land beer. It's not quite
perfect.
And the Pilsner is like really dry, and uses all these Hallertau Blanc hops. So trying to give a little bit more of that vinous, hoppy aroma without dry hopping it. So sort of give like the dry, bitter, hoppy, and the sweet, malty Helles style to help to not confuse people too much. But we brew so many like other Pilsners throughout the year. We have like a Czech style Pilsner that we do seasonally. And we'll have different Keller beers that are loosely based off of Helles or Pilsner. So just trying to have something that still is a Pilsner at heart, but gives a little bit of a differentiation to House Lager. And that's sort of how we came up with Post Shift. And those hops are something that Florian introduced us to. One of my favorite hops. I really think it gives a really intense, noble German hop character. And so you just get a little bit more aroma without having to dry hop the beer.
Obviously I love the beer itself. I love the name of it though, as kind of an homage to, drink it after your shift. And I know, Ashleigh, you had said about your event that's coming up on Saturday where you think everybody in the industry comes out to drink your, what was the Pilsner, the slow pour?
Yeah, in a liter though.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
One of the things that always stuck with me from early on, one of the brewers that we'd interviewed had said something like, every brewer and every person in the industry after their shift, they'll sit down and they'll have this kind of beer. So I love that the post shift is this level of Pilsner that they would have after their shifts. It's just like a perfect homage to the industry itself. I love it.
Yeah, we've got a lot better with beer names. We started out with like Hoponius Union, which still to this day, 10 years later, no one can pronounce. And we realized later on, just need to keep it simple and words that are easier to pronounce and they'll sell better. So
it's Postscheift, right? Postscheift.
Well, we struggled with Politamave the first time we had that one.
Yeah, I still have to tell him.
I was calling it Polamavi.
You pronounce it because now I know how to pronounce it.
Yeah,
I know.
Write it down, and I had to phonetically draw lines to separate the syllables in my notebook to get it right, and I still messed it up.
Yeah, just gotta order it all the time, then you learn how to pronounce it.
Well, I mean, does the internet teach you how to pronounce it? Because to me, it just
not correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody's going to tell you to pronounce it wrong, but either way, it still tastes good. That's what matters. Well,
this is a pro tip for all you budding brewers out there. Call your beers things people can pronounce.
And then don't be surprised when somebody still can't pronounce it.
I don't know. They can't pronounce Hellas, so
Oh my God, what pronunciations have you gotten?
Probably
of
got
that?
Hells.
Hells,
Hells, yeah,
all
okay.
the hells. It's fine, you know.
What's
I know what you
was
mean.
the craziest pronunciation of Heponius that you got?
Oh, we have a list. There's like 20. Even so, it's Hoponius Union, and more times than not, it's usually onion.
No.
Unions. Optimus.
Optimus.
I can't. Yeah, that's like the everyday misspelling or mispronunciation. But there's some gems out there. I wish I had the list for you, but I don't have that in front of me right now.
That's like St. Boniface hegemony.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
They're stout. People call it hegemony and all kinds of things. Yeah.
I mean, I had that word wrong for forever when I was a kid. There was a book that I read that had hegemony in the name. Anyway, that's a different conversation for a different day. And that actually, I think, brings us pretty much to the end. We're coming down on time.
We are coming close to an hour. We said an hour to an hour and a half.
Cool. I mean, I'm cool to keep going.
Yeah,
if you guys are.
I was going to say, as we are getting close to the hour mark here, we've had a couple of Q&A questions pop in. I would like to invite, anyone watching right now, if you have any questions, go ahead, pop them in the Q&A, and we'll kind of trail off here, I think, answering questions.
Yeah.
But while we wait for some people to come up with some amazing questions, and I know you will.
No pressure.
There is one other thing about lagers that I wanted to talk about, and that is how the lager styles of beer are particularly suited to showcasing a brewer's talents, and how it is very difficult to hide flaws in a lager, whereas in other beers, there are ways to sort of cover things up. I'd be curious to know your thoughts.
I would say probably both of us we make lager, with decoction, long lager times. We are basically a 3 malt, 2 hop, 1 yeast brewery. We have a flotation tank. We naturally carbonate beer. Honestly, I would say maybe it's like hard, I guess, but I think for both of our breweries, we set up breweries to make lager beer, and it's just a different cadence, honestly, than making ale. And it's just a different commitment in general. So yeah, I mean, ideally you don't taste any flaws. Ideally it's so clean, that you would notice if something was off or whatever, or there's nowhere to hide behind. And I love that. But, it's all just like the techniques that really we've set our breweries up to do from the very beginning. And so I would say, like, probably for us, it's much easier because we thought about that at the very beginning of setting up our breweries and not trying to adjust our breweries to make lager. And a lot of people like look at what we did and go, oh man, how did you do this? How did you, whatever, like it takes so much more time, but every one of those tanks, it's not like it could have something else in it. They're all lager. Like, it's not like I make lager and it could have made some other 2-week beer or something like that. Like every tank just has lager in it. So it's just a different cadence. And so I think like when somebody's making a lot of styles, I can see why it's more difficult because the commitment thing, of course, is one part of it. The adherence to ingredients, the decoction, the actual brew day itself can be pretty long. But, when you do it all the time, it is just the thing that you do. So it's kind of weird to talk to lager brewers about, you can't even really make anything else. You never really thought about it. So
The one thing you do.
I'd sort of agree with that. I think that people's issue with brewing lager beer and its challenges is they don't know what to do. They don't know how to brew lager beer. I think that's a big misconception that it's harder to brew lager beer, or like its mistakes are more obvious. There's plenty of mistakes that are plenty obvious in ale beer. I think that there's a lot to be said about the quality of just craft ale, and that I think the problems with craft lagers are no different than people's issues when brewing ale. So yeah, I think if you're, as you mentioned, if you know what you're doing, it's no harder, or it's the same idea as brewing whatever ales you may be brewing, if that's what your brewery set up for.
One thing I genuinely appreciate about lagers, and we may have mentioned it earlier kind of in passing, is that it really is just the 4 ingredients in the beer. It's the water, the malt, the yeast, the hops. And
You forget the fifth one. It's time.
well, okay, yeah, I guess
it's a big deal. No, like it is a big deal. The time portion of it is honestly the one where most people who try to make lager and they don't all the time, that's where they fall down, or that's where they don't understand where the important parts of making lager are. And yeah, doing decoction and stuff like that is really cool. And I think it, aids in the way our beer tastes, and who knows if you can taste the difference. Same with, our flotation tank, etc. But if you're not committed to at least doing the first part, like everybody kind of gets caught up like that. Do you have a lager tank? And that's not really, it's a really amazing thing to have, and it helps me make lager the way I do. But the most important things, honestly, are just that commitment to like the very first part of that time, committing to fermenting it cold and pitching enough healthy yeast. Like that's the most important thing of all of those. And I think that a lot of places they don't understand that portion of it. You can't pitch a lager the same way you pitch ale. You can't treat that part of it the same way. You don't want to see yeast activity within 2 hours of pitching. There's those are the moments that actually it matters. And that time component to me is probably the most important of all those things.
Now that makes sense. I love that it's ingredient wise, it's so simple, and you're right about the time. But I wanted to one thing stress about, only having those main core physical ingredients, let's say, that you can really do a lot with it.
I prefer to call them corporeal
ingredients. You can really do a lot with it. And it shows that, there is talent involved, and that you can really highlight what one strain of yeast does, or one particular hop does overall. But more to your point about the time aspect of it. I mean, you said yours are 8 to 10 weeks mostly?
Yeah, usually. I mean, once in a while, something happens, like a pandemic or something, and
or something.
I'm suddenly out of beer for some reason, and but I understand, and I know Jack does too. You understand where, because you've done everything else, where you can, and I wouldn't call them shortcuts, but where you can, if you had to make a beer this way, like where you can trim things down in order to make the same quality beer and maybe a slight bit less of time. So yeah, sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
we do have a couple of questions that have popped up in the Q&A. Steph is back with us with some technical difficulties there.
This is what happens when 3 people in your household are in this thing.
Too many people connected at one time. But yeah, I do want to mention some of these questions. First one from Ron, patron of the podcast. He wants to know, he has 2 questions. His first one is, why do you do decoction? So whoever wants to
go first. Okay, so the of course you don't have to, yada yada, malts are modified, yada yada, whatever. Go be in a brewery one time while you're boiling mash, like when it actually gets to boil. Like go into a brewery when you're actually boiling mash, and that change in aroma, it is in the beer in some way. It does make it drier. I think in Helles actually is one of the beers that benefits most from it. And honestly, I'm a brewer. I make beer for a living. I love doing it. I think it, changes. It makes my beer my beer. And while there's maybe not necessarily on paper a quantitative reason to do it, I think there's a qualitative reason to do it. And it kind of just builds on all the other little things that we do. I think especially in dark beers, you're getting some of those like really awesome things, melanoidins, everything you love about toast and chicken skin, kind of like it makes dark beer taste different without having to add a lot of specialty malts. And then again, for me in pale lager, in Helles, it makes that malt flavor kind of like punch without being a cloying sweetness to it. So the short answer is because I like doing it. The long answer is because all these other things.
Well, Jack, why do you decoct?
Yeah, so similar idea is that this, how do you get malt intensity, but at the same time get drinkability? And when I was just starting to learn how to brew, I'd make all these lager recipes with biscuit malt or melanoidin malt or whatever other specialty malt to try to get this maltiness into a lighter style beer. But then the beers are sweet and they're filling, and they don't have the same sort of flavor profile. And there's nothing wrong with that style of beer. I mean, if that's what you're going for, great. But if you're trying to reinterpret German style lagers, how do you get the lightness of the beer while at the same time getting this fresh malty aroma at the same time? There's really only one way to do that. You got to decoct it so you get the aroma, but at the same time you get which is really odd, you get the flavor, the aroma of intensity malt, but then the drinkability and lightness of a higher attenuation. And it seems sort of contradictory, but if you want to make that sort of German style beer, you just have to decoct it. But there's no reason you can't add specialty malt and do it that way, but you're going to get a very different beer in the end.
Decoction.
That shirt is in the mail, by the way, for me. I did break down and order it.
That's our new favorite human robot t-shirt. Says decoction. Nice. Really funny. Another question from Ron, and we'll start with you, Jack, on this one. What is your favorite lager that is brewed by another brewery? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I'm very lucky that, as I just mentioned half an hour ago, I've been getting multiple beer shipments from Bierstadt. So I've been drinking some slow pours and some Helles. So that worked out very well for the timing of that question. So that was awesome to get those beers in. And thanks for those beers, by the way. That's fantastic.
We should do a beer trade, like a six barrel. Cool.
I'll send you a pallet. You send a pallet back to the brewery. Is that cool?
Yeah, like that. Yeah, let's figure that out.
I guess, yeah. Ashley, what's your favorite lager from a different brewery?
All right. So to be fair, I haven't left the house in like a long time. And also to be fair, I do live a 3-minute walk from my brewery. So there's not a lot. But I have been enjoying, so there are a couple local breweries here that I think are making some like pretty kick-ass lagers. My friend at a brewery called Little Machine makes a beer called Cerveza, which is a totally dope name. He makes Mexican lager. And then what I kind of like will be able to seek out a little bit more is I'm good friends with Chris Johnson at Green Bench. As he sent me a bunch of his lagers, and they're tasting so awesome right now, like just decocted and everything you love about lager. So like those are some of my friends. Honestly, I have a pretty cool group of friends that make pretty good beer, so I don't end up with a lot of garbage on my doorstep. So a lot of people are making, like they don't get to make them that often or as often as they want to, but I'm pretty lucky that people know what kind of beer I like to drink or what kind of lagers I like to drink. Friends at Westbound and Down, they make an amazing Italian pils. I still tell them it's too hoppy because it is, but I can definitely enjoy it once in a while. So I'm lucky that I have known a lot of good people that drop good beer off at my doorstep.
That is awesome. We did have another question come through from Jill, and Jill says, I know when you go to the large macro breweries, they have the horizontal lagering tanks. As smaller breweries, do you use these or just the more standard vertical tanks?
We have lager tanks. They are about a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, so they wouldn't be necessarily true to what you would think is a very long, skinny lager tank. But honestly, any kind of change of scenery for the beer is pretty good. They're still only about 9 feet tall, even at 85 barrels or so. And then our fermenters are slightly different than a typical cylinder conical. We have what are called a dish cone. So the cone is not a cone. It's like a bowl, and there's a standpipe in it. So we actually can't harvest yeast until we move beer off of the yeast cake. So it is about the change of scenery. We couldn't use those as uni tanks anyways because they don't have a cone to them. We can't harvest that way. But we do use lager tanks, and I do think there's benefit to them, but I don't know that they're necessary to make really great lager. I just think they're kind of one for us, as focusing only on lager. It's just kind of you can't do one thing 100% better, but you can do 100 things 1% better. And it's just one of the 100 things that we try to do to differentiate our beer from other beer.
And Jack, what about the equipment at Jack's Abbey? Is it the horizontal ones like the bigger guys, or is it the vertical standard ones?
For the most part, we have vertical tanks. We do have horizontal tanks, and really they're just there for Oktoberfest. So Oktoberfest, we just have a huge quantity of beer we got to put out in a short period of time because it's a short season. So we end up letting them sit in lagering tanks and horizontals. But we sort of have a mentality. We'd rather not move the beer. We try to keep it as once it's in the fermenter, we try not to process it if we can avoid it. Sometimes we do have some open fermenters because then you got to move the beer from the open fermenter into a closed vessel. But for the most part, we try to keep everything in one tank and not move it around, except for when we have to let Oktoberfest sit and we don't have enough fermenting vessels. So we'll let them sit in the horizontals for the summer until they're ready to package.
I do love a good Oktoberfest, a good Märzen. Who doesn't?
I had your Oktoberfest last year. It was excellent. Nice. Somebody brought some back for me.
Very nice. Copper Legend.
It was great. It was great. It was one of my favorite Oktoberfests that I've had in a long time. It was awesome.
Nice. Thank you.
Now I want an Oktoberfest.
I'm making Oktoberfest in like 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, you're going to start brewing it soon, and that means it'll be ready in.
Oktoberfest is already in the tanks. It's ready. Ready.
I bet you guys are so much bigger than us. I bet you guys have to release yours a bit earlier than we do.
Yeah.
I'm going to release mine a week before Oktoberfest.
Yeah, I wish. No.
Yeah. So I'm lucky to be able to do that. Yeah. So September 12th is when we'll release Oktoberfest, and that's only in cans. I won't serve it on draft until September 18th, I think it is this year. So we're lucky being a little bit smaller. We don't have to. Huh?
When's CBC? The week before?
Yeah. So I may sneak a keg. I may put a keg on just for that. We'll see. I'm still struggling. I mean, as a lager brewer, you live 3 months in the future.
Yeah.
So it's I backed it out. And I know in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they're going to have to make it. And then I know I'll have to have it in cans at least a week before Oktoberfest, but we'll try. But I'm going to end up putting it on draft. I already know it. But
yeah,
I want people to drink it. It's going to be awesome. It's one of my favorite seasonals,
Please tell me you serve it in liters.
Absolutely we do. Okay. Is there another way?
So two lager-centric breweries. I pitched this idea to a podcast guest a while ago, and it was just kind of I had a few, and it was towards the end of the episode. But now that I'm mostly coherent, I'm going to see what you two think of it as lager-only breweries. How would you feel about doing an Oktoberfest, but flip the calendar, almost like a Christmas in July kind of thing, but do Oktoberfest in February?
It's called Drink a Maibach.
I mean, I don't know. There might be advertising and marketing involved, and that's a very strong sentiment there. Yeah, do you think your drinkers would enjoy turning that up on its head a little bit, or is that just me being dumb?
I
will not judge either of you.
I won't say dumb, but I will say, Märzen, you can have it technically in March. That would be an appropriate time for it. But honestly, the beer drinkers super seasonal. They would maybe like it then, but honestly, making it all year round. So there's this idea that if you make a beer all year round, they'll drink more of it. No, you give them a timeline when they can get it and when they can't, and they drink twice as much of it.
And we need.
What happens is November 1st, everyone thinks the beer's old, and no one wants it anymore.
There's no such thing as Novemberfest, if you ask me.
Yeah.
I told our sales guy, I will dump it down the drain if it's not gone by the first week of November. And he's like, you wouldn't do that. And I was like, you don't think that I would do that? Absolutely, I would do that. I would do that. Yeah, you better take it. He's like, I'm going to take it all home. And I'm like, you better, because like you said, everything is old by then. Nobody wants to drink it. Yeah. It's a very super seasonal thing. It's just the color. It's the maltiness of it. It just especially if you do a Märzen style, not a Wiesen, everybody just like they resonate towards it.
Mhm.
That's how pumpkin beer has gone out the window and traded for Oktoberfest.
I was just going to say,
Happy about.
Oktoberfest needs to stay as a seasonal beer to continue to dethrone the pumpkin beers, because I feel like it's been doing a great job of that in the past few years.
Absolutely.
So we'll keep it in the Oktoberfest.
Yeah, and if you do happen to have any extra in the first week in November, you've got some friends on the East Coast who would appreciate it.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's true.
They've done
Just
a good job, honestly.
address it to the drain. You know my address.
And of course, you got to send some of the Framingham too. So Jack can have.
Absolutely.
Definitely. All right, cool. Well, we got through all our questions.
Yeah, thank you for those who submitted those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for everyone for checking it out and hanging out with us today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. I'm really glad we got to do this. I'm glad this idea came together, and I'm glad we had two stellar guests who are heavy hitters in the industry, specifically lager-wise too, to join us. So, of course, I guess we should go through plugs. Jack, if anybody wants to find more about Jack's Abbey, if they don't already know, where should they go?
I guess you can check out the website, jacksabbey.com, or any of our social media things, like presumably Twitter and Instagram and all that sort of fun stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we're in the age of like, yeah, you can search it. Yeah. Like, you know what you're doing on the internet.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll tag all the things when this comes out as a podcast episode and a YouTube video and all. We'll tag everything. But Ashleigh, if you would like to, of course, direct people where to go to find more about Bierstadt.
Yeah, the internet.
Perfect.
Bierstadt Lager. So it's not Bierstadt Brewery. It's Bierstadt Lager. If you put that in, bierstadtlager.com, you can figure it out.
If you type it in Google, even if you spell it wrong, you'll still find it.
That's true.
You'll still find it, hopefully. If you can't, I don't know how to help you.
Yeah, if you can't, you don't get to have the beer.
Honestly, if you go to the Instagram or the Facebook or whatever, it's probably me answering you anyways. So
there you go.
That's a valid point. Well, thank you both for joining us. This has been incredible. I'm glad we got to do it. This is a lot of fun. The beers are delicious. Thank you both for providing them to us. And hopefully people out there know where to go to find it.
We got a doggo.
We got the dog.
He wants to be in.
What's the dog's name?
Keller.
Oh,
she is deaf, by the way, but it's also Keller beer. Come on. She's a great Dane. She's a great Dane.
That is awesome. But yes, Jack, Ashleigh, thank you both for joining us. This has been fantastic.
No, thank you so much. And seriously, Jack, let's trade some beer.
Yeah, send me. What's your email? Let me know. I
think it's on. Is it on the little thing? Do we have a shared email?
Connection happened, I'm sure.
Yeah, mine's Ashleigh at bierstadtlager.com, but spelled Leigh.
And you legit went out and said it on the air. Perfect.
That's fine. No, I tell people they can email me all the time. It might take me a month to get back to them, but you can do it.
It's like if your email address is literally your name at your organization, it's not a secret.
That's true. Yeah, it's easy. I get a lot of emails that are like, I guessed your information off of publicly available domain information. Like, that's cool. Boy. Good for you. Don't email me again.
They know my email. Just email them. They'll give it to you or whatever, vice versa.
Perfect.
So, I'd love to do a beer trade.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Sweet.
It's a great idea. We love making connections.
Yes,
here
that's
at Beer
true.
Busters.
I would like to throw out one other connection besides just a beer trade, maybe a collab.
Yeah, one day I would love to do it. Well, it's like, I hope we can meet in person, chit chat, and then figure out something awesome. Because you guys have a cool big ass brewery. We just have a little baby thing.
I want to see the brewery because I've been to the brewery, but I haven't. I saw the big copper dome up on top. But is that what you're using to brew?
Yeah, we have a brew house from 1932.
It's awesome.
It's about a 38 hecto cast out. 100 barrel fermenters, 100 barrel lager tanks, or 85 barrel lager tanks. So
nice.
Make 22. Yeah, hopefully we'll make 2,000 barrels of beer this year. We'll see.
Very nice.
Awesome. Awesome.
Well, as far as information for us would go, if you are not familiar, beerbusterspodcast.com is where you can go, and links to all the social media and stuff from there.
I did want to do one special plug while we're on video.
Please do.
Wearing merch. This shirt and the shirt that Steph's wearing, along with a bunch of other cool shit, is available at beerbusterspodcast.com/shop. You should go check it out. And there's a sale coming up soon, which I probably shouldn't tell you because you won't buy anything until the sale starts.
Wait for the sale.
Wait for the sale.
Wait for the sale.
Tell them this. You have to tell them the sale starts now, and they won't know if it's not a sale.
Man, that's dirty, but I like it.
The sale starts tomorrow.
When people ask us if we have happy hour, we tell them we have $10 liters of Helles, which we have all the time.
Oh,
Yeah, we have $10 liters of Helles.
That is brilliant. I mean, also, that's not a bad price for a liter of that beer. That's
Nope.
awesome.
All right. Well, before we let you all go, we did have one question come up, real rapid fire.
Oh, yes, we did. Yep.
Question for Ashleigh. Will Bierstadt be available in Pennsylvania?
No. Once in a while, like if we do a beer festival somewhere that's a really cool beer festival, I do like to subsidize my travel by sending beer to different bars there while we're there. So if you invite me to a really cool beer festival in Pennsylvania, I'll send beer. How's that sound?
Oh,
Or
We need to make it happen.
yeah, or start a beer podcast.
That's how we get it.
Yeah.
That was a great question and a great answer. And again, thank you, anyone who's in the audience still. Thank you for tuning in. Jack, Ashleigh, thank you so much. On behalf of Beer Busters, for Steph and for Wayne, I am Dan Baker. And I can't go without saying cheers. And of course, drink lager.
Drink lager.
Cheers, y'all. Appreciate you.
All right, everyone.